Mobile device management. Now, you know as well as I do that the mobile devices in your environment, even though they may run a version of Windows, don't necessarily run the same version of Windows that your regular desktops and servers do. You know, the desktop OS and the server OS are a lot closer than the desktop and the device OS are. But at the same time, you need to be able to manage the devices on your network and push software to them and manage their inventory and manage some of their configuration components at the same time. And doing that without a tool like Configuration Manager can be somewhat challenging. Configuration Manager actually added mobile device management capabilities back in SMS 2003, and they get a lot easier to use in Configuration Manager 2007. We've heard this for a lot of the different functionalities. And here inside of this nugget, we're going to talk about the things that you gain by enabling management of your mobile devices in your environment through mobile device management and Configuration Manager. We're going to talk about prepping the agents and the management points and the distribution points so that they are aware of the mobile devices in your environment. We're going to talk about deploying inventory extension packages to the desktops in your environment so that their inventory, their ability to gather inventory about mobile devices is extended so that information can get flowed back to your Configuration Manager server. What you'll find is that the desktop that your mobile device is actually synchronized with, and in a lot of cases in this sort of configuration, are going to be the proxies, if you will, that connects the mobile device to the Configuration Manager server. And so we'll need to deploy things like this inventory extension and also this client transfer installation package to that device or to that desktop so that it can actually handle the installation on the part of Configuration Manager. This second one down here is one of the number of ways that you can actually install the Configuration Manager client to that device. That's the client transfer installation, and we'll talk about how that's done. And then we'll also talk about some configuration items and packages that you can create for managing the configuration of those devices and how to set up that configuration and keep it under a baseline, and also how to deploy software. And unlike the previous version, deploying software with mobile device management and Configuration Manager 2007 is relatively easy, and I think you'll appreciate how that's actually done. So the first thing that we need to actually do is actually prep our Configuration Manager infrastructure for the input of mobile device information in. Unlike a lot of the previous nuggets, we're not actually going to be adding any sorts of roles to our site server, but what we need to do is take the existing site server roles and enable them to understand this data that's coming in for device management. What we're going to do is go here under Site Systems and look at the site server here, and actually take a look at the distribution point and the management point configuration that we've set up for this environment. If I double click the management point here, one thing that we need to do is first of all allow devices to use this particular management point, so that those devices can send their information up and receive policy information back from the management point. We haven't done this before, so we have to check this box for allowing those devices to use that management point. We can allow internet-only client connections. If we're using native mode, we can intranet only. If we're using native mode, we can allow internet client connections as well. That's the first step that we need to do. The second step that we need to do is actually manage the distribution point and create a little bit of a change over there as well. For distribution points, we need to actually make those distribution points aware that they can transfer software updates. They can transfer files and things down to device clients. And in order to do that, we need to allow our clients to transfer content from this distribution point using bits HTTP and HTTPS. This is required for those device clients and also for internet-based clients. And you'll see down here we have the same option because we're in mixed mode of only allowing internet-only client connections. And also we need to allow clients to connect anonymously. Now what this is going to do is this is going to enable our distribution point to collect those packages and programs that are going to be eventually distributed off to devices. And then the devices will be able to make use of those distribution points to download and actually install the software as we configure it as part of our packages and programs. And so we need to enable this in order for this to function with device management. The third thing that we need to do after we've done this is actually change the client agent and do a little bit of configuration there. If we look at component configuration here, client agents, what we're going to look at is the mobile device client agent. The mobile device client agent is actually what instructs our mobile devices to do whatever we need them to do, whether that be policy-based or software distribution-based or hardware-software inventory sites with things. You'll see here on the General tab that we can choose how often those devices are actually going to check in with the device management point for either new configuration or new software. If they have to retry, how many minutes of delay or perhaps hours of delay are involved with the retry, and how many retries we're actually going to allow them. Under software distribution, we can enable the software distribution to those device clients. Without checking this box, we will not actually be able to push down software to those device clients. We can choose software inventory. Here, this allows us to enable specific software inventory on those device clients. We can run this every so often, just like we would a normal desktop or server client in terms of running it every week, for example. We can choose what sorts of files may be inventoried. In this case, we don't exactly have any files currently inventoried in here, but we can set up either star or star.exe, any types of files that we want to make sure are inventoried as part of that software inventory on those individual clients we'll need to include here. Under hardware inventory, we can enable the hardware inventory as well, and that lets us know what the hardware components are, just like the desktops, for those device clients. And that allows us, if you remember, that different devices have different processor classes, and those processor classes may have software that's designed specifically for that processor class. The hardware architecture on devices is not nearly as compatible with each other as we have with standard desktops. And so, a lot different than with standard desktops, you'll be using your hardware inventory a lot more with pushing to devices if you have lots of different devices, because the software that you deploy may be written for that particular architecture, and so you're going to have to be aware of those architectures as well. And again, just like we were doing before with the desktops, we can also enable file collection, and the same caution I'll give you that I gave you then, I'll give you again, is be very careful about collecting files, because unlike inventory where we're collecting just the metadata about the file, here with file collection we're actually collecting the actual files off of those clients, and so this can pretty substantially increase our data storage space to be able to do this. In this case, we'll actually disable this because we don't want to enable file collection, but if we did, we can enable file collection and click this button to actually choose what files we would collect off of those devices. So let me go ahead and click close here, and we're going to accept the changes that we've done for the mobile device client agent. Now that we've got the infrastructure prepared for the deployment of device clients, we actually need to set up the packages that are necessary to instruct our desktops, the desktops that are synchronizing with device clients, to, number one, be aware of device clients and be aware of their inventory, and then number two, to actually deploy our little configuration manager client onto those clients. Now, before we actually do anything here inside of the Configuration Manager console, I want to bring up this folder that I've created, C Source Files. This is the same source files location we've used throughout this series, and I've created another folder here called Device Client Deployment. Inside of this Device Client Deployment is the client transfer information, device setting packages, and also the inventory extension information. And where I actually got this information from was my computer, the C drive. Once I went into the C drive, I went into Program Files, Microsoft Configuration Manager, and then Device Client Deployment. So what I've done is essentially taken this more or less golden image of these packages from the default installation of Microsoft Configuration Manager and copied them to this source files location, because once I complete the copy, I actually am going to need to, in one particular case, make a couple of changes to the initialization files, the configuration here. And those changes are text-based, and we'll talk about those in just a second. But what this does is this enables the use of these installation files in my source files location. So I'm going to go ahead and close this down here and close this down. Now that I have this source files location available to me, the next thing I want to do is actually prepare the package that I'm going to deploy involved with the inventory extension. Now, if you've been using Windows XP in your environment and you're used to using ActiveSync, ActiveSync does not have the necessary components in place for Configuration Manager to work with those mobile devices. What we need is a tool called Mobile Device Center. And Mobile Device Center can run on Windows XP. It's installed natively with Windows Vista. And what this does, this inventory extension effectively does, is enable, again, the desktop to understand what the configuration is on that mobile device. And once the desktop understands what it is, it can then flow that information back to the Configuration Manager database, where it's then stored inside of the database for hardware and software inventory. So what we need to do here is actually we need to create a new package. And just like before, just like any sort of package, we're going to do that here from within our software distribution node. What we do is right-click the software distribution node and choose a new package from definition. Now, by default, there are a number of new packages from definition that come as part of our Configuration Manager infrastructure. This is just natively right out of the box. And the first thing that we're going to look at here is inventory extension. We're going to run this inventory extension package, and we're going to create it based off of this definition. But the one thing that we are going to do is actually enable those source files from that source directory. We just talked about where that source directory is, so we need to point the package to that source directory so it can actually download to those desktops and actually complete the package installation. I'm going to click Next here, and here we're going to choose our source directory. In our case, we'll choose Browse, and we're going to look down for sccm Nugget, which is our location where we've got those source directory files. We're going to click under Nugget Lab here, and then sccm Nugget, and then Source Files. And then the file we're looking for here is Device Client Deployment Inventory Extension. We're doing the inventory extension. That's going to point us to the correct file so that we can correctly deploy this inventory extension package. We choose Next and Finish, and it's going to create that package for us. As you'll see here, it automatically creates the package as necessary. Just like any sort of package, we're going to then need to upload it to distribution points. We're going to need to verify its configuration is appropriate. We can look under Properties here to see information about the package. We can go and dig deep into the package and look at the programs that are assigned with the package and what's available with those programs for the package as well. So all of this are things that we're going to need to do just like we would normally do with any other package as we deploy it. Again, we are going to deploy this package to desktops and not directly to the devices themselves. Once we deploy it to the desktops, the devices will actually work with their typical synchronization that they do with those desktops. Now that I've created the inventory extension, let's just assume at this point that I've created this inventory extension and that we've deployed it out to the clients on our network, and our clients have been sufficiently extended so that they can actually make use and send their device information to Configuration Manager. The next thing we need to do is actually create another package for actually installing the client to those mobile devices. And I will tell you that there are actually a number of different mechanisms by which you can install that client to those devices. The one in particular that we're going to talk about here in this nugget is what we call the client transfer installation. And what that means essentially is that I'm deploying this installation to that desktop, and the next time that the device synchronizes with the desktop, it's going to actually install the client and begin working, and the desktop becomes that proxy between the two. And so there are other mechanisms too. There's over-the-air installation mechanisms. There's the direct manual installation mechanisms. But this one's really the easiest one to use because we can use those source files that we created to deploy directly to that desktop. The other good news is because doing this mechanism allows the desktop at the time of synchronization to recognize the hardware architecture for each of the different devices that are available. We don't necessarily need to understand what sort of hardware architecture is available, whether it's an ARM processor or whatever kind of processor is on that device. It will take care of recognizing this for us. Now, before we actually create that package and create that program, what we need to do is actually do a little bit of modification to a specific file in our source files location that is involved with actually configuring the installation so that it recognizes our Configuration Manager server, so it recognizes all the things that are necessary for it to install correctly. I'm going to go back here to this device client deployment, and we're going to go to the client transfer folder that we created here, and you'll see this file called dmcommoninstaller.ini. This file actually includes a number of text-based settings that we need to configure so that when that installation goes through its process, that the client, the device client, actually understands where it needs to go, understands where our Configuration Manager server is, understands the settings that are set for that Configuration Manager, all the things that are needed for it to be successful in its installation. Now you'll find that this file, which as you can see here by the size of the scroll bar, is actually fairly large. This file has a number of settings that relate to each of the different types of processors. We first of all have certificate enrollment settings that are important for us if we're in native mode and we're actually using certificates to validate and verify the clients to the servers. But as we scroll down here, you'll see, for example, the ARM v4 processor for smartphone 5.0. For each one of these different processor types and hardware architectures, we're going to have a number of different settings that we need to set. You'll see here, first of all, DM server name is the server name of the device management point which the device will connect to. In our case, this could be sccm Nugget. And down here we have the install action. Do we want to install, uninstall, or perform no change? Do we want to do a clean install, or do we want to preserve the previous installation? What sort of security mode do we want to have? Do we want to lock down with certificates, or do we want to use no certificates for no client authentication? What kind of connections do we want to create? Do we want to invoke connections for any action, or for user invoked actions for any operations? You can see here that there are are a number of different settings that we're going to have to set that, again, depend on how we want to architect our device management. When you set any of these settings within this location, you're going to set them in the main settings, and you may also have some optional configurable settings that you need to set as well. If you do those, make sure you remove the semicolon here so that those are actually configured as part of the installation. What you need to know about this is that if you set one of the settings, you're going to need to make sure you set it for all of the processor classes. You'll see here this is a smartphone 2003 ARM v4 processor, and they have more or less the same configuration here as what we saw above. So make sure when you're doing this that you replicate any changes that you make to all of the locations within this folder. You'll see there are a number of them as we scroll down. Once you've completed all of those changes, you can safely save the file, and this file will be used by the device management installation to actually complete the installation of that device and point it correctly to the right configuration manager server and all those things that are needed to make it successful. The last thing we actually need to do is actually go and create that package again just like we did before. And in this case, luckily for us, there is another package definition already available for us, which makes this process relatively easy. If we right-click on Packages and choose New Package from Definition, yet another one of the default package definitions is the Device Management Client Transfer package. This package actually allows us to use the text file that we just manipulated to install the actual client itself onto the desktop so that desktop synchronizes with the device. Again, we have to obtain those files from a source directory. If we click the next here and browse, we can browse again through the entire network and Microsoft Windows Network and the Nugget Lab and sccm Nugget and our source files location, except this time we're going to go to our client transfer location. This is the location where we're going to use for our source files. Sub to this is actually the language code that would be installed. In this case, it's English for 409, but we want to go to the client transfer location because that's where the core installation is, and it will search for this through the subfolders to find whatever processor-specific installations are required. I click OK here and Next and Finish, and it actually creates the process, creates the package, creates the program, and then we can go through and deploy, using an advertisement, deploy that package to the desktops in our environment that have devices. Now remember, there's two steps to this process. Once we have the inventory extension in place, we can then create a collection that contains those desktops that have attached devices. And then we can push this second package just merely to that collection so that we're not pushing the second package to desktops that don't have those devices. So be aware of that when you're actually creating these advertisements associated with these two packages. Now that we've actually got our devices recognizing our configuration manager server and vice versa, we can now actually make use of the device management node down here in our configuration manager console. You'll see mobile device management here, and under mobile device management we have configuration items and configuration packages. Now what we use this node for is actually managing specific configurations of those devices. With our configuration manager server, we'll actually specify certain configurations that we want to maintain as a baseline, and we can do that for devices as well. The good news about devices is that because they're more or less limited in what they can do, they're limited in the different types of configurations that they require. If we right-click configuration items and choose to create a new one, we're going to create a new configuration item. We'll call it My Device. And we choose Next. And now we have a list of the different configuration item types that are available to us. And you'll see they're relatively limited in what they can do. We can choose a browser favorite, for example. We can choose Exchange Active Sync, for example, internet email or security policies. All of these are specific to mobile devices, and you'll see here the different types of platforms that those configurations actually relate to. For example, here Exchange Active Sync has one for WMO3 and one for WMO5. Be aware of the actual types of devices you have when you create these configuration items. Let's actually go through configuring one of these so we can show you what a configuration item looks like. Let's say, for example, we want to do Exchange Active Sync, for example. If we click the Next button here, we can choose our server. Maybe it's exnugget.nuggetlab.com, and if we want to choose, we can choose to synchronize every 5 minutes or a couple hours or what have you based on the device. If we click Next here, we can choose to enable calendar synchronization and contact synchronization, for example, and the age filter for our calendar sync, for example. We can choose email synchronization. How old do we want to sync emails, for example, and do we want to truncate at a certain level for those as well? And any optional settings as well, maybe username and domain. Once we've done this, we've actually created that configuration item, and the configuration item will appear in here under the list of configuration items. To deploy that configuration item, we actually need to create a package out of it. Now, if we go down here to the configuration packages node, we can actually create a new configuration package that relates to the items that we want to create. So let's call it my config package here and choose the next button. And then from there, we can choose, based off of the different types of mobile devices we have, we can choose which configuration items relate to that mobile device. You'll see here as I scroll down, Windows Mobile Smartphone 5.0 has one configuration item that relates to it. The earlier types, for example, Windows Mobile 2003, do not have any configuration items because they don't relate, the configuration doesn't relate to that hardware processor architecture. So let me scroll down here to Windows Mobile Smartphone 5.0, and I can select the item that I want to create. I choose the next button, and the next button again, and it actually creates that configuration package for me that allows me to then deploy this to my Windows Mobile devices. I'm not done yet because I actually have to update my distribution points with this information and then also really advertise this to the available devices that I want to advertise it to. I can do that here right within the configuration packages node. If I right click and choose update distribution points or even manage distribution points, I can choose to update this or copy this to new distribution points. In my case, I've got a distribution point here under sccm Nugget, so let me go ahead and upload this to sccm Nugget for the purposes of later distribution. I click next and it actually uploads this package to sccm Nugget, and now sccm Nugget as the distribution point can now push this out to devices as part of the advertisement. I then advertise it by right-clicking and choose Advertise to Device. You'll see here now that I can choose what distribution point that I want to advertise this from. I can choose the program that I want to advertise, and do I want to advertise a program from this package? I can then choose the program that is available to me. Here's my config package that I've actually created. I can choose a target if I want. Do I want to advertise this program to an existing collection or create a new collection and advertise the program to it? I can choose Browse. All of this at this point is very similar to the process of actually deploying software to regular desktops. And that's one of the big benefits here, is that this process is very streamlined. And so if you're used to the process of deploying it to desktops, it's going to be not a big change for you to deploy it to mobile devices. You'll see here we have a number of default device-based collections that are created. You'll see here Smartphone 2003, Smartphone 5. Again, as I said before, you have to be very conscious about the different types of hardware architectures that you're deploying to. And so if we created this package for Smartphone 5.0, we better deploy it to only those devices so that we don't have problems with the package deployment. If I click OK here, I can go through all the rest of the things that we're used to seeing with a regular package deployment, meaning name, any sub-collection information, what sort of schedule do we want to deploy it to, and then what sort of program. Do we want to assign it or not assign the program, for example? In this case, perhaps, yes, we want to assign the program. And that actually completes advertising this package to this device, this collection of devices. And so that really makes the process, again, of maintaining the baseline of configuration across all your devices very, very easy. It makes it very, very cohesive because all of those devices are going to be getting configuration parameters based on the configuration items that we selected here. And you'll need to create multiple of these configuration items and deploy them out as you see necessary for your environment. And so this really concludes the process of deploying configurations to our devices. But still at this point, we haven't talked about actually deploying software to those devices. We've actually, deployed specific configurations here under items and packages, but what if we have a piece of software that we want to actually deploy to that device to give it some additional functionality? Maybe, for example, we want to deploy Adobe Acrobat, for example. You'll see up here under the packages node, we have the Adobe Acrobat package that we created a long, long time ago and that we've been using as a repeated example over these nuggets as a potential package to be deployed. Within this package, we can actually here under Programs create a separate program that is designed for installing a particular package to a device. Now a caveat here, in that some packages will not work on devices, no matter how you code them in whatever programs. You have to have specific software that is designed for installation not only on a device, but on that device's hardware class. And so if I right-click here into Programs, again, this is just an example so we can show you exactly how this works. If we right-click under here and choose New and Program for Device, we can actually create a program for that device, maybe it's Adobe Acrobat for devices, that relates to installing that on that particular device. Maybe we'll give it a command line key, acrodevice.exe. It's just a sample in this case. What this is going to do is instruct the device how to install this particular piece of software. We can run the command line in the download folder. From a particular folder here, we can choose the estimated disk space or how we want to download the program, whether it's any time over a fast network or when the device is docked. Essentially, we are creating a program in much the same way that we created programs for desktops here, but in this case it's for a device. Once we get to the point where we have that program created and we want to deploy that to a device, we can right-click the particular program and choose Distribute Software to Device. By clicking this link, it's going to bring up the ability for us to distribute this program, or essentially create an advertisement for this program. And the advertisement is going to look very, very similar to what we've seen before in creating advertisements for desktops. We've got to choose distribution points. We've got to choose a particular target collection. Again, be aware that you need to choose a target collection that includes devices, for example. We need to choose a name and a comment for the advertisement. We need to choose any sub-collections that are necessary, a schedule, and then the program if we want to assign or not assign the program, just like we've done before up to this point. And so this is the process we would use to actually deploy software to our devices. We're going to deploy it to those devices, and those devices will automatically update once they synchronize with their host machine that they're working with. And so this really concludes the process of installing not only configurations to devices, but also software to those devices so we can bring them completely under management through Configuration Manager. So what have we talked about in this nugget? We've talked about the mobile device management and specifically the processes that we need to do to bring those mobile devices under the management of Configuration Manager. We had to talk about prepping the agents and the management points and the distribution points and sending out those inventory extension packages and the client transfer installation packages so that we can get that client onto our devices. We talked about configuration items and the packages that we would use to actually deploy configurations, and then also deploying software to those devices as well. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.